Welcome to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, sponsored by EarthX, the world's largest environmental experience, and also sponsored by Natural Awakenings magazine. Live your healthiest life on a healthier planet. Now, here's your host, Bernice Butler.
Welcome to today's show of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. We are now in our third season, and we are just more excited than ever to continue to help you explore and understand the unbreakable relationship between your health and the health of the planet. Here we look at the hottest topics related to our environment and its sustainability and how they affect your health and wellness. Here are issues like climate change, plastic pollution, extreme weather events, and others will meet up with everyday impacts like allergies and asthma, digestive issues and gut health, cancers and lung, heart issues, and more. So listen in today as we interview experts for today's show on plastic pollution. Today we're going to focus in on plastic's unseen health effects. A recent report that was authored by the Center for International Environmental Law, as well as a number of other plastic-focused organizations, reveals that plastic is a human health crisis hiding in plain sight. In their report titled Plastic and Health, The Hidden Costs of a Plastic Planet, it says that at every stage of its life cycle, plastic poses distinct risks to human health, arising from both exposure to plastic particles themselves and the associated chemicals. People worldwide are exposed at multiple stages of plastic's life cycle. As well, just last week, I received an alert from the Center for Environmental Health, whose representatives are here with us today. And in that alert, they said there is 31% more plastic than is safe in some socks, including baby socks. Since 1950, about 8 billion tons of plastic have been produced worldwide. The human population increase and our consistent demand for plastics and plastic products are responsible for a continuous and persistent increase in the production of plastics, the generation of plastic waste, and its accompanied environmental pollution. We likely have never gone a day without seeing something made from plastic. So I want to ask you now, look around you. How many items can you count that are made from plastic? Isn't it crazy? In addition to the plastic we see in everyday use, large pieces of plastic remain in landfills for hundreds or even thousands of years, or even forever. Tons of plastic waste flood our oceans, devastating our marine ecosystems, and nano-sized plastics, which are like about the sizes of a strand of hair, flood into our oceans, devastating the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. Yep, that means it's inside of our bodies. The influx of plastic into our food chain, our water supply, and our air poses a threat to human health for two key reasons. First, there's no safe exposure level to microplastic. It turns out that these temples, our bodies, were not built to be filled with plastic. Second, plastic absorbs and magnifies other pollutants and toxins, spreading them and the harm that they cause further and further throughout the environment that we are exposed to every day all around us. Every piece of plastic ever produced still exists today, and 2/3 of it has been released back into the environment, whether it's broken down into microplastics in the ocean, or in a garbage pile, or deep within our agricultural soil. Plastic makes its way to your plate in sneaky ways, with some studies concluding that we ingest thousands and thousands of particles of plastic each year. Now, in response to the mounting evidence showing plastic is present in our drinking water, the World Health Organization has now decided to very formally look into the problem. Plastic has also been found in sea salt, and researchers attribute that to the ubiquitous nature of single-use plastics such as water bottles and plastic bags, which comprise the majority of plastic waste. In 2015, about 70% of plastic water bottles went unrecycled, and much of this plastic waste ends up in landfills, incinerators, as we mentioned before, and you guessed it, in our oceans and seas. And plastic has also been found in, guess what? Seafood, not surprising, but what is surprising, it's also been found in beer and honey and sugar, the things we love. So as we can see, there's an urgent need for government agencies and health authorities to enact and enforce environmental laws that will monitor the production, usage, and disposal of plastics. And in addition, some of the harmful chemical constituents and additives used in the production of plastics, which we're going to talk a lot about today, such as phthalates and BPA. And many people say all of these should be banned in consumer goods and in plastic products that are in direct contact with food, beverages, and with our children. This is a lot. So here today to help us understand and unpack and explore this some more are two experts whose their life work is about this. We have Michael Green with the Center for Environmental Health and Tracy Woodruff with the University of San Francisco. Michael Green is Chief Executive Officer at the Center for Environmental Health, or CEH, which he founded in 1996. And the Center for Environmental Health is a leading advocate for comprehensive chemical policy that protects people from toxic chemicals by working with communities, consumers, workers, government, and the private sector to demand and support practices that protect people from illnesses related to pollution in our air, water, products, and food. And CEH is one of our go-to resources and has been for the entire life of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. Prior to founding the Center for Environmental Health, in addition to other things, Michael cared for the sick at Mother Teresa's mission in Calcutta. He also worked in government in Washington, D.C., at both the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Environmental Management and with the U.S. EPA. Michael is a recipient of the California Wellness Foundation's Leadership Award, and he's also been awarded the prestigious Compassion in Action Award for his work protecting children from lead by the Dalai Lama Foundation. Welcome, Michael. We are so happy that you could be with us, and did I get all of that right?
It all sounds good. Don't believe the hype.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And our other guest is Tracy Woodruff. Tracy is with the University of California at San Francisco. Tracy is a PhD and professor in the University of California, San Francisco's Department of Obstetrics, Gynecology, and Reproductive Sciences. She is a recognized expert on environmental pollution exposures and impacts on health with a focus on pregnancy, infancy, and childhood. And her innovations in translating and communicating scientific findings for clinical and policy audiences has been very significant. Before joining UC San Francisco, Dr. Woodruff was a senior scientist and policy advisor to the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Policy. Welcome, Tracy. We are so glad that you could make time to be with us, and we're just looking forward to both of you all making us so much smarter. I want to start out with Michael, and can you tell us about what caused or inspired you to start the Center for Environmental Health? And were you immediately led to this involvement or this focus on plastic pollution? Or how and when did plastic pollution become such a large part of the CEH's work?
When I was 18, I was walking along the Charles River in Boston, and I saw really clearly the conflict between the river and the city. I knew I was a freshman in college. I was told you're not allowed to put your feet in the water; it's too polluted. And I just had this revelation. And then fast forward maybe 15 years, I had done some of the things that you described, including working at U.S. Department of Energy on the cleanup of nuclear and hazardous waste, at U.S. EPA on environmental justice. And and I saw the need for there to be more direct action with the sources of the pollution that is most directly affecting people's health. So when you said that we use carrots and sticks to create change with the private sector, and when one is moving when one is interacting directly with those who are the source of the exposure to the toxic chemicals, there's a real opportunity to create change, positive change. And some of that is very collaborative with the private sector. And so that was the genesis of it. Plastics are a large piece of it because if you think about plastics, what are they? They're million-year-old plants and animals that we're digging out of the ground, and we're changing the chemistry. And we're changing the chemistry in a way that also can affect our chemistry and our health.
We're going to go to break, and we're going to come right back on the other side and continue this conversation because you really got my antenna up when you talked about what plastics are and what they're doing. So we'll be right back on the other side of the break with Michael Green from the Center of Environmental Health and with Tracy Woodruff with the University of California, San Francisco. Thank you all. We want to give a shout-out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, Central Markets, Sunflower Shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available free for download online at nadallas.com. Check them out. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening and plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more, and we are told with the best Christmas trees in Texas. Check them out at nhg.com. And our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, non-mercury, looking at the whole body, specializing in periodontics. Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to today's episode of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio on plastic pollution. And today we're focusing in on the unseen health effects of plastic and plastic pollution. And with us today, already making us smarter, is Michael Green with the Center for Environmental Health and Tracy Woodruff with University of California, San Francisco. Again, thank both of you all for being with us today. And before the break, Michael was telling us how the Center for Environmental Health became focused or inspired to work on plastic pollution as part of their portfolio of work.
So there's a science experiment that's going on in our world. And that science experiment, and that is that we're using chemicals that we don't really know the health impacts of. And we're using them in commerce, and we're then being exposed to them in our food, in our air, in our water. And a lot of those chemicals are petrochemicals, and that includes plastics. So when we conduct the science experiment, what's happening, in fact, is that the exposures to the potential toxic chemicals in the plastics, we don't really know. We haven't done the science often to know the health impacts adequately to make the decisions about how to protect people from those exposures. Some of those chemicals we know more about, say BPA, bisphenol A, and others we don't really know. And so in order to sort of address that's what's important to us at CEH.
Indeed. And Michael, when you were telling us before the break about CEH and how you do your work, you mentioned that you all use carrot and a stick approach to work with the big corporations. Can you tell us about this? What's the carrot and what's the stick?
Sure. So an example of carrots are that we advise companies and other large institutions like local governments or universities on how they can reduce their use of toxic materials, maybe in their buildings, in their construction, in the furniture they have in their buildings, in the materials they use in their flooring, in the materials they use in their cafeteria, where people might be exposed to toxic chemicals through their food because the food is served in plastic plates that have styrene in them, that there's data that shows it leaches into the food. And so that collaborative work is something that's in service to large companies, where they can then make adjustments that are ideally in sync with their values, are going to make their employees happier, their customers happier. And so that's what the carrot looks like. And what the stick looks like is sometimes there are sectors or companies where we don't think we're going to be able to get their attention by coming and saying, can we help you? And so there are times where we actually bring public interest litigation to transform an entire sector all at once. So, for example, right now, we are intending to get BPA out of apparel, out of socks and other clothing, because it's absorbed through the skin, and we found that it is common practice for BPA to be in apparel that clings right to the skin, like socks.
And polyester, I learned last week as well. So you all are bringing public action or legal action?
Right. So our intention is that the entire sector will change their practices so that people are not exposed to BPA from wearing socks. So what does that mean? That means that the socks or other apparel, they're actually made out of plastic. So when you say polyester, when you say spandex, those are plastics that are made plastic fibers that are made out of petroleum. And what's happening is that the oil and gas sector sees that the demand for their commodity of oil and gas for burning is leveling off, at least in the global north, in the U.S. and in the EU. And so they're worried about this. And one of their strategies to continue to expand their profits is to replace that market that they're selling it for burning with having us live a life that is surrounded by plastics, even when we don't know about it, even on our baby's feet.
Indeed, it reminds me, it took us years and years and years for, I think, the collect public knowledge base to learn that BPA is not good. So that gives me hope, though, that all of us can learn that the spandex and all these things that we have grown used to in our clothing is not good. Because I think that's, it's dealing, like you said, with the corporations, but it's also on the demand side. But let me ask you this, and I probably know the answer to it. How do corporations respond to knowing about the detrimental health effects to their consumers of their products?
So it's all over the place. It's all over the place. And sometimes there is a champion who is high enough in the company that they just want to do the right thing. We partner with those folks all the time in all kinds of different sectors, not just healthcare or the obvious sectors, but all kinds of sectors. Other times they're just worried about their brand, their reputation, and their market share and their margin. And that's the case where more likely the stick is going to work as compared to the carrot.
Indeed. Thank you, Michael. Tracy, in our show last week, we had the Basel Action Network, and we explored how there are many, many harmful chemicals contained in plastic at every stage of the life cycle, and they're all around us all the time. Can you tell us about some of these chemicals that are affecting our health in perhaps unseen ways, or maybe unthought of or unnoticed ways?
Sure. I guess I would rephrase the comment to be the chemical exposures are invisible, but the health effects are observed in the population. So for example, or not even an example, people are probably looking around and they see a lot of their family, friends, colleagues that have chronic diseases, whether it's challenges in getting pregnant, diabetes, neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD and autism. All of these have been going up in terms of their rates in the United States for the last, since they've been documenting them. Mm-hmm. At the same time that we've seen an increase in production of industrial chemicals used in commerce, or chemicals used in plastics. So there has been definitely some of these that have been well studied, or we've had early indicators of harm that then we had to wait for not to wait for the science, but to deal with the fact that people are trying to sometimes deny that science. So I'll give you the example of one chemical that we've been engaged with for a long time, which are phthalates. So I think did you mention phthalates, I think, in the beginning?
Yes, I did.
You mentioned BPA, but phthalates. So phthalates are a chemical. They're what Michael described. They come directly from the, offshoot of the natural gas methane production. They're actually, some of the phthalates are I like to call them parent phthalates, that you make a phthalate, and then they can be used to make many different types of chemicals that we find in all our everyday products. But phthalates are ubiquitously used in plastic. So one of their uses is to make hard plastic soft and malleable. So any kind of plastics that are malleable, think about when you're in a hospital, so an IV tubing or an IV bag, in your home, vinyl flooring. I mean, we can talk about what's been happening in the vinyl flooring industry, but for sure, phthalates have been used in vinyl flooring material. They've been used in pharmaceuticals. They have other properties that make them used in personal care products, so they also convey scent, but they're just used, and we continue to discover more uses of them.
Before you started, I was going to ask you, how can we see or determine we're in contact with phthalates? But what you just told me says it's all over the place.
Right.
What I hear you saying is that phthalates are used in the production of plastic to make soft, malleable material. So you got that plastic that you can bend or crumple, like a tubing and stuff like that.
Yes. And it shows up in all different kinds of applications. I mean, I talked about what you might see in a hospital, right? People are familiar with IV bags, but it can be used in industrial applications. So one interesting study found that there's phthalates in milk, and people aren't totally sure, but they think it's from the tubing that's used to take the milk from the cow to the production of the milk.
Beer. I read that it was in beer. And I imagine similar things.
BPA. I went to a talk once where BPA was used to line the cans for wine, so you get a pretty big exposure to BPA. I think it was for red wine. I was like, that.
And something that is only just beginning to come to the forefront for women is the plasticizers in our cosmetics. And I know I use a whole lot of cosmetics. And I think most women do, we use a lot of cosmetics, from face cream to makeup to whatever.
12 products a day.
Yeah.
That's what some of the research says. But so we know that, I think the thing about phthalates, there's sort of a science story about it, but there's kind of a confluence of events in that researchers at EPA were actually researching phthalate exposures in animals, and then this was picked up in humans. It's what is known as a endocrine or hormone disruptor, and it can influence androgen levels. So that was an important experimental part. At the same time, you saw biomonitoring, basically measuring these chemicals in people's bodies, sort of taking off starting in 2000. There's also another story about but phthalates was the first time anybody had ever measured phthalates in people, was released in 2000, and they found everybody in the United States had phthalates in their bodies, and it were higher levels in women. And this was the beginning of the where is it coming from makeup story, cosmetic story. But I think one of the things, there's two things. One is we know it affects androgen levels. It's linked to male reproductive health effects, as well as a whole host of health outcomes that are linked to your hormones, including your testosterone, which is super important during development, so exposures that occur during pregnancy. And the other is we shouldn't really have to be doing this detective work, right? The government should really require that the manufacturers tell us where all these chemicals are being used, which is not the case. They have to record that they are using them, and EPA does report, if they tell them, what volume they're being manufactured, but where they go in all the various places is still not known, and it's not required to test these chemicals still for existing chemicals on the marketplace.
Indeed, but they know they're not a good thing. We're going to go to break now, and we're going to come back to you, Tracy, after the break to continue with this conversation, because I want to dig in a little bit and make sure that our listeners understand about endocrine disruption. I want to really focus in on that so they know what it's doing to us. We'll be right back on the other side of the break. Thank you. We've been with Michael Green with the Center for Environmental Health and Dr. Tracy Woodruff with the University of California, San Francisco. Thank you. Welcome back to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio, to today's show on plastic pollution, plastic's unseen health effects. And we are back with Michael Green with the Center for Environmental Health and Dr. Tracy Woodruff with the University of California, San Francisco. And they really are making us much smarter. And right before the break, Tracy was telling us about some of the health impacts of plastic pollution. And she mentioned that a big thing that they do that's detrimental to our health is that they are endocrine disruptors. And I want to sit there for a while to kind of unpack what that means, what that is to our health. How do people know this is happening? Tracy.
So first, let me talk about what an endocrine disruptor is. These are chemicals that can interfere with the hormone levels in your body. They can do it through a variety of different ways. They can influence how hormones are processed or how hormones are made or how they're synthesized. But the end result is that exposures to these chemicals, which are endocrine disruptors, can change the hormone levels in your body. And hormones are super important, right? I mean, we know hormones because they are for sure important for fertility, right? And for making sure that you have basic homeostasis and of actions to control your heart and your.
But they're regulators.
Exactly. But they're really important during development, meaning during the developmental period, hormones are orchestrating key components of development. So when we were talking about phthalates, a good example is that androgens or testosterone is really important for male reproductive development. And there's an increase in testosterone that happens during a particular period of the fetal development that leads to the development of the male reproductive tract. So if you don't get the complete increase in the testosterone, you can influence male reproductive development. And it's been shown with phthalates, because they interfere with androgen or testosterone levels, that means that you have higher levels of phthalates, you can have lower levels of testosterone, particularly during the prenatal period, you can have effects on male reproductive development. They can be subtle, but because everybody is exposed in the population, you can still see a lot of implications for male reproductive health, which downstream can be influences on male, for example, sperm quality or male fertility. And what's remarkable and disturbing at the same time is that while we've been looking at these chemical exposures, we're also seeing a decline in sperm quality, sperm count in the population globally. There's been a 50% decline in sperm count quality over the last about 50 years. And this was some data that was published and talked about in a book by Dr. Shauna Swan, which has been she's been working on for many years.
She was actually with us last year, about a week or so before her book was published, and she was talking a lot about her research, and that was like eye-opening. And she's done her research. I've heard. Since then, there are some people who want to discount it, but, just listening to her experiments and things she's done makes sense to me.
Well, yes. And so I think that's a really interesting part of this conversation is thinking about who is going to be impacted when we discover that phthalates can adversely affect health. And Michael talked about this, which is, certain components of the industry, for example, the people who are producing the phthalates, there's going to be implications for their market shares, right? Mm-hmm. So there's documented that the industry has some influence over science, or sometimes they influence the public discourse, or generally downplay the science and delay, lead to what's called manufacturer doubt and delays in decision making.
Which is not unheard of in other sectors of our society. So it's not like, hey, we're used to this. We know this happens.
And I just want to say one more thing about phthalates, because there is higher documented levels of phthalates in Black women in the United States, and it is in part due to some of the consumer product practices, or consumer products that are through racist marketing practices that have been committed in that area. But the end result is they're still using the phthalates, and we need to be thinking about how do we reduce that if we really want to a level that's not a substantial increase in risk for the whole population. And
Indeed.
Some people have higher exposures, yeah.
And last thing, I've read that plastics attract other pollutants, which interests me. How does that happen?
Well, what I have seen is, for example, you have certain sources of exposure, and so an example would be dust. Mm-hmm. I saw once an interesting study on grease, like kitchen grease, and those tend to attract chemicals, particularly the kitchen grease. So phthalates are co-traveling with other chemicals that are produced in plastic, maybe a BPA, things that we probably haven't even measured yet because we don't actually know whether to measure them or not. And then also in dust, and then that's how people can also have exposures. And I just want to say for dust, it's really challenging because children are going to get higher exposures because they're on the ground, crawling around and putting their hands in their mouth. And so I would say that that's really, there are these sort of sources that come from the original source that also can induce an exposure.
Indeed. Thank you, Tracy. Michael, too, before I go on to my other question to you, can you weigh in on that, too, and anything that you've seen or that the Center for Environmental Health has been working on or dealt with as it relates to how plastics attract other pollutants?
Well, what Tracy said about the dust is really important, and about children. Children are not small adults. They have different habits, like Tracy described, where they crawl on the floor and then put their hands in their mouths, but also they breathe more air to their body side than adults. Their bodies they have a larger ratio of their, surface area to their body size. They are interacting with the world in a different way and in a way that makes them more vulnerable, combined with the fact that also their bodies are still and their brains are still developing. And so for all these reasons, something like what Tracy you just described is a component of who is most vulnerable and how they're being exposed to that. And then there's another thing I just want to highlight, and that is that the communities that have the facilities where the plastics are being manufactured and also where products are being manufactured using the plastics that are made at refineries and in cracking facilities, those communities are also having a profoundly disproportionate impact through their local air and water. And that's a key justice component of the concern about the life cycle of plastics and its impact on our health.
Indeed, and we touched upon that just a wee bit last week. Now, we know from the wellhead that when it starts at fossil fuel, we see all of that. I think perhaps what is less known or perhaps less visible, and it was brought to our attention last week that, many of the facilities like Coca-Cola and other heavy industrial users of plastic may have their own manufacturing facilities. It made me wonder, am I in downwind or somewhere near a plastic manufacturing facility and I don't know it? Talk to us a little bit more about that, because I suspect that that's another one of those things that, if not hidden, we don't know about.
Right. So the fact that communities that are near where they're, like in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, the fact that those communities are bearing a disproportionate burden is unambiguous. And all of us actually are downstream and downwind. And the reason is because many of these chemicals are as they break down to smaller and smaller pieces, the plastics, all of us are going to be exposed through microplastics in our food or in the large distant transport of them through the Earth's air and water cycles, because they become smaller and smaller, and that doesn't mean that their health impacts are smaller, because actually a larger particle might have less of an impact than a smaller particle when it is a hormone mimicking or disrupting chemical, because your body might come across a larger particle and think, I don't know what that is, but that's not food, I should get rid of it. But a smaller, minute piece of plastic, for lack of a better term, is one that could be more easily confused by your body into thinking that is a hormone, therefore it is now time for my body to take particular action. Grow fat cells, grow cancer cells, go into puberty early, go into menopause early, or anything else.
Indeed, and I'm told, too, the smaller ones can actually permeate the cells, whereas perhaps the larger ones cannot. A question that I encounter or ask in a lot of our monthly themes, why everyone must care about the undue burden to the vulnerable classes, even though they may think they are not vulnerable plastics. And you said something earlier, like we are all downstream. We'll be right back on the other side for Michael to answer that question. We want to give a shout out now to our sponsors. That is Natural Awakenings, Dallas-Fort Worth Magazine, the Green, Healthy, and Sustainable Living Authority for the DFW Metroplex and North Texas communities. Print issues of Natural Awakenings can be found in all Whole Foods markets, natural grocers, central markets, sunflower shops, and many, many other locations, as well as available online for download at nadallas.com. Our other sponsor is North Haven Gardens, serving the Metroplex since 1951, the most respected horticultural establishment in North Texas, offering gardening, plant education, concierge services, DIY classes, gifts, and more, and we are told with the best Christmas trees in Texas. Our other sponsor is Lynn Dental Care, practicing dentistry for over 38 years with a holistic approach, looking at the whole body. Specializing in periodontics, Dr. Lynn is board certified by the International Academy of Oral Medicine and Toxicology. Check them out at lindentalcare.com. Thank you, sponsors. Welcome back to the last segment of today's show of Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. And our subject is plastic pollution, and we're talking with two experts on the health effects of plastic pollution. We are back with Dr. Tracy Woodruff with the University of California, San Francisco, and with Michael Green, Chief Executive Officer and founder of the Center for Environmental Health. Again, thank you all so much for being with us. And before the break, Michael was about to talk to us about the vulnerable populations for plastic pollution and why we all must care about this and about the vulnerable populations, even though we may think that we're not, because one of the things he said early on is we're all downstream from some of these places. Michael, help us out with this.
Sure. Well, so there's a couple of things. One is we want to live in a just world. We want to live in a world that's fair. And so it is not fair that that the communities that have less political power are the ones that have to bear the greatest burden of our consumption of plastic water bottles or soft, cushy pile sweaters made out of petrochemicals. And so that's just an issue of justice and fairness. And beyond that, there's also the fact that all of us are impacted. So manufacturing plastics in the plastics sector is profoundly energy intensive. It has an extreme climate impact. And there's a very strong correlation between the way we make these different synthetic petrochemicals and energy that's required to be used to do that. And so that is a climate impact that is on all of us. Then the other thing is when you're looking at the vulnerable population of children, that obviously affects all of us profoundly because if we are creating a situation where, like Tracy, you said that sperm count are down 50% in my lifetime, and then what is the legacy we're leaving for future generations around their ability to live lives in a world that is safe and flourishes and thrives? So that there are justice components, and then there are just components that affect all of us.
Indeed. Thank you for that, Michael. And the other thing I want you to talk to us a little bit and help us understand is how is plastic pollution impacting the environment in a way that impacts our health? And is there an intersection or a connection with plastic pollution and the COVID pandemic?
Well, certainly the petrochemical sector and the sectors that make disposable products were using COVID as an opportunity to increase their sales. So that's for foodware, of course. It's also for cleaning supplies. It's for all kinds of single use. Single use became more safe in people's minds. You can't take your ceramic coffee cup, or your coffee cup from home to a cafe anymore, because and the manifestation of that is that everybody is using more and more single use. And where do those single use things go eventually? There is no away. We're all here on this one, planet. So the where it's going eventually is those plastic components of those throwaway things that are being pitched more because of COVID are creating more microplastics in the environment, more in our food, more in our air, and it has the outcome, both known and not yet scientifically known, of making us less well.
And so basically, plastic pollution is being exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. And I know that people don't really realize this. We're all focused on COVID and keeping safe and don't realize all of that additional plastic we're creating and using and putting in landfills and disposing of.
Right.
Okay, I want to go back to Tracy for a moment. I want to talk about, Tracy, what are some of the other harmful chemicals and their effects that are contained in plastic and how they may be affecting our health in some other ways, either directly or indirectly.
I think there's two things I want to say about this. One is you mentioned also BPA, which is another chemical that's found in plastic. And there has been a lot of research on this chemical. And I think we had early indicators about how harmful it was, but it did take some time before it was, and actually really it's based on market-based campaigns like those that CEH does, that it's moved out of products. Just to know the government, the federal government, at least the U.S. EPA, has not taken any regulatory action on BPA. And FDA, I'm not sure FDA is either.
So it's not banned. Is that what you're saying?
Okay. And also, I just want to say that the state of California has said that BPA is a known reproductive toxicant for effects on the female ovary. So what does that mean? I mean, that's a fertility issue, right? If females don't have well-working ovaries, that can influence not only your success, your fertility success, but it also has influences on puberty and menopause and other aspects of female well health. Now, that doesn't mean that BPA is not also affecting these other types of health outcomes, whether it's diabetes, obesity, metabolic disorders, and effects on male and brain development. But it happens to be, in terms of the regulation and science, where California has landed on this in this area.
Are there any statistics, Tracy, on infertility, just outright, not necessarily where it's coming from, but are there any historical statistics on the incidence or the rates of infertility in our society?
Well, there's what we talked about in terms of sperm decline, which will influence fertility success. Right. And there has been, the Centers for Disease Control does collect statistics on success, basically access to fertility treatment, but also whether you are able to successfully achieve and maintain a pregnancy. And they have documented declines in that number, so you get pregnant and then be able to have the baby after that. And I think what is concerning about those statistics is that, so we also know that women are also, the age at which they have first pregnancies is going up. So that can influence fertility. But what you're seeing is this difficulty in achieving and maintaining pregnancy is also going up among young women, so ages 20 to in their 20s, where you are going to have your most high success with fertility. So it's affecting every age group. And I think that is what is very concerning about not just fertility, but fertility is like a marker for other types of related health components that can be going on in a woman. But we have to think about what is being replaced with BPA, right? So BPA levels may be going down, but we still have this increasing use of plastic, and they're using a chemical that it's like BPA's, I don't know, brother and sister or something. It's like a BPA substitute that looks like BPA but might have a different, chemical on the end of it.
Like one molecule difference or something.
Exactly. And data that we've been looking at that we're working on is finding that these substitutes are actually increasing in the population. Same with the phthalates. There's certain phthalates that have been banned for children's toys or certain types of uses, and their names are DHP, DBP, blah, 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 but they're being replaced with other phthalates, which we know are increasing in the population. So if we don't have a comprehensive approach to dealing with them as a class or as a group, it's just going to be a rearrangement of the molecules and continuing use of the plastic. So again, dealing with plastics as a whole component of the market helps address any chemicals that are going into it, which tend to be these, at least in these families that we know of. There's been a lot of coverage about this population bust, right? We're seeing declines in a number of babies in the United States population, and a lot of that is blamed on women, like, oh, you wait too long to have a baby, or you went and got an education. But how do we know it's not from these chemical exposures, which we know are affecting men and women in different aspects of fertility?
And I think we're getting there, because you made a point. I see a lot in every day in various other venues of spheres of my life where there are a lot of young women and they're having fertility issues. And these are these are young women. These are women under 30. We just got 1 minute to go, and I want to go with Michael with two quick things. And that is, have you noticed any positive changes with corporations? And are there any consumer products that listeners should be avoiding purchasing or using? Last word, Michael.
Well, people should look for natural materials. Yeah, there are a lot of companies that are really trying to do something different. People should use natural materials. So if you're thinking about what you eat and drink out of, use glass, use wood, use metal as compared to something made out of a 65-year-old plant or animal. And then it also goes for the clothing that you wear, and just to be aware of everything in our lives that it's like we're a fish and we're swimming unknowingly in petrochemicals.
Indeed. Beware of all plastics. There's sometimes you can't avoid, but beware and be concerned. And as I tell my relatives, certainly don't heat up anything in it. Thank you all. We really appreciate your help today. We have been with Michael Green, CEO and founder of the Center for Environmental Health, who does a lot of work in helping us to navigate this whole plastic pollution arena. And we've been with Dr. Tracy Woodruff with the University of California, San Francisco, and she is really doing some important work in helping us to understand really one of the big issues is the fertility impacts of plastic pollution. Thank you all. We really appreciate you, and you have really made us smarter today, and we are looking forward to being able to be with you again in the future. Thank you. And thank you, listeners, for listening in today to Healthy Living, Healthy Planet Radio. The conversation starts here, but our goal is for it to continue in your homes, in your social circles, your workplaces, at the water cooler, and in the grocery checkout line, so that we can all work together to realize that healthy living is simply not possible without a healthy planet. Our culture is the result of 1 trillion tiny acts taken by billions of people every day like yourselves. And each of these tiny acts can seem insignificant, but all of them add up, one way or the other, to the change that we each live through. This is your host, Bernice Butler. Thank you for listening in today, and join us again next week for more on our series in plastic pollution. And listen to any of our past podcasts wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.